Hello, I am Edie Lush and namaste from London. Welcome to the final day of what has been an incredible week here at India Global Week. We have been overwhelmed with the positive response to this conference. Even during COVID-19, during times of lockdown, we've been able to celebrate the ties that unite the UK and India to the rest of the world. Dance, music, we've heard discussions about investment, politics, security and trade, and we've even had some philosophy. We've had over 30,000 registered participants from 76 different countries. 266 speakers have spoken to us over the 3 days. If you'd like to stay tuned to what we'll be doing in the future, visit indiaincgroup.com for more. And to reiterate what we've heard from Manoj Ladwa, India Inc. believes in building great winning partnerships, and you have all been terrific partners to us. If you've missed any of the sessions or want your friends to see those replays, log back into indiaglobalweek.com and you'll be able to see and share the sessions. Do keep tweeting about us, India INCORP, and use our hashtag #BeTheRevival. Now, on to one of our final sessions here today. The India Diaspora is playing a key role in the fight against COVID-19. Indian communities have been impacted around the world, and they're standing with and supporting vulnerable communities that have been severely impacted by the pandemic. Indiaspora's ChaloGive campaign has raised over $1.1 million and enabled over 7 million meals in the United States and India to help migrant workers and food insecure populations. This coming up panel will discuss the efforts of the diaspora so far in the response to COVID-19 and look at how the need to stay engaged will continue for the coming weeks and months. So to moderate the next session, I'm pleased to hand over to M R Rangaswami. He's the founder of Diaspora.
By the administrator, so you might have to do.
Thanks for having us to have a great closeout of these sessions. And I have 3 eminent panelists with me, and so we'll jump right into it pretty soon. We have first Hitan Mehta, who's going to cover the UK and Europe for us. Hitan is with the British Asian Trust and has been devoting a lot of his career to giving and philanthropy. We also have Narendra Mulani here in the US on the East Coast. Since I'm on the West Coast, we're going to cover both parts of this continent. Narendra was an executive, senior executive at Accenture for a long time, for 24 years. And now in his next phase in his journey, he's dedicating a lot of that to giving and philanthropy. And then finally, from India, one of the hotspots of COVID today, unfortunately, is Vidya Shah. Vidya is the founder of EdelGive and also heads up the EdelGive Foundation. So we have 3 great people with us. So let me get started with the backdrop of COVID at this point. In the US, obviously, it's one of the hotspots. And we keep opening and shutting and opening our economy here, much to the chagrin of people. A lot of safety issues as well as economic issues that are really upon us here in the US. And the same thing holds true of the UK and India as well. So what the diaspora has done is a key part of the support system that we'll discuss today. Just to give a little bit of a color on this, in the US, it's not just Diaspora who's stepped up to helping people in need. It's the entire Indian American community. We're about 4 million in strength in the US, little over 1% of the population. But this was the time that I think our community stepped up. And in fact, next week Diaspora will be releasing a report that details all the good work all the community organizations have done, whether it's the Sikhs feeding people in New York or kids making PPE equipment for our different healthcare workers, to all the way to feeding people and taking care of people in need, both in the US and also in India. So that's the backdrop here in the US. What I want to quickly go around to our panelists is to get the real-time assessment of what COVID has made as an impact in your different regions and different countries. So maybe I'll start initially with Vidya. What is the latest on COVID as a situation in India, and what's the real story on the ground?
So, thank you, MR, and thank you, India Inc., for having me. I think, like most countries, we responded in a very agile way. And while the lockdown was imposed fairly early on in the crisis, and it enabled us to kind of push out the curve in terms of the number of infections and the number of deaths, it did lead to, like most other countries, it's led to an economic crisis, and it's also led, in some senses, to a humanitarian crisis, largely because of the loss of livelihood for millions of people. In the last few weeks, I think, as the lockdown has begun to be lifted in phases, there is some return to economic activity. The recent data does show that we have recouped some of the job losses. But I think the issue with getting some of the migrant workers coming back to bring back economic activity faster than we would have liked. I think a lot of focus is currently on that. And I think from a philanthropy side, there was a huge response. I know we worked very closely within Diaspora to talk to the US community. But at the same time, I think within India, we saw one of the largest retail giving activity that I haven't seen this in a very long time. So a lot of people did come together to help in every possible way. I think currently the issues of livelihood and therefore of hunger and starvation are closely linked. A lot of the work, frontline work, was delivered not just by the healthcare workers, which was fantastic, but also a lot of NGOs and civil society actually came into the front lines to enable the delivery of food, the delivery of rations, and all the assistance required to get people back home. I think helping civil society become stronger in the months to come is going to be also an important, a point of focus for a lot of us in philanthropy.
Great. Thanks, Vidya. And I know one common thread we'll discuss through this is how the diaspora has come together. Even in the US, when COVID started, well, our members called us and said, what is Indiaspora going to do about the situation? But they also pointed to us, it has to be done for the US, where we live and where we make our livelihood, but also that connect to India. So they told us whatever programs we created, which we ended up focusing on hunger at the end, that we had to do work at scale and impact in our own backyards, but also lend a hand to India. And so that was the role, I think, key role that the diaspora has played, is supporting our home country and also supporting the country we came from. And in that vein, Hitan, what happened in the UK and what has been the work to date, both within the UK as well as your support of India?
So thank you, Emma. In the UK, we saw very early on a lockdown, and we've seen numbers obviously rising through the period. Numbers have been dropping rapidly at the moment, and lockdowns have been released, and people are now starting to be able to socialize again. But for the Asian community here in the UK, there were certainly points where there were some real concerns. Very early on, Northwick Park Hospital, which is in northwest London, which is largely the service hospital for many of the Asian community here in London. We suddenly saw a critical incident there, which meant that they had no bed space. And this started to trigger people's thoughts that actually there were some real issues in and amongst the BAME community, so the Black, Asian, minority ethnic population here in the UK, that maybe there was some disproportionate effects of COVID-19 that were starting to take place. And we've seen research now being published showing that they are more vulnerable, and there are real concerns about what that may mean longer term, with comorbidity issues, multi-generational households, and also a disproportionate number of people working in the National Health Service as well from those communities. So we've seen real concerns on that front that I think are going to be ones that are going to have to be looked at in a really long-term way by government and by the community themselves around their own health and well-being as well. I think the other thing that we saw hugely with the diaspora community is the step up in the diaspora community to serve the entire population that surrounded them. So we saw the network of gurudwaras, mosques, temples taking up huge amounts of slack to try and support the NHS, to support hospitals with food, ringing and serving the local communities that they all live in, to actually help those communities around them. So we saw a real outpouring of work at that stage as well. And then, you know, some really great examples of heroes that we at the British Asian Trust have been able to highlight. You know, 80-year-old grandmothers doing Facebook Live exercise classes showing how to stay fit at home, for example, through to people like Minesh Patel, the British Airways pilot, who was bringing back British citizens from Bogota and places like that. You know, we really saw the community stand up to be counted in this crisis. On a philanthropy front, again, you know, we've seen a lot of people donating their time and efforts and resource locally here in the UK, but equally the same concern for work in South Asia and in India, especially the issue of migrant workers has been an area that's been hugely highlighted, obviously, through the media. And through the work of the British Asian Trust, we launched an emergency appeal for South Asia. His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, sent a video message in to very early on, having recovered from COVID himself. He was literally very happy to be able to support this kind of work to try and raise money on the ground for work on the ground. And we've really seen the community come together to try and support that.
Great. And Narendra, I know you're on the East Coast and you represent a state, if I might point out, Connecticut, which has one of the highest income levels, but also some of the poorest people in your communities as well. So as a philanthropist, I know you focused on food and hunger. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is happening and what your thoughts are?
Sure. And, you know, what I'm impressed by is the similarity of the themes across India, the UK, as well as the US, where as the lockdown started mid-March, I think there was a very strong awareness suddenly that hunger, which is not a major issue in the US, was going to be a real issue for the next few months, as part-time workers, restaurant workers, Uber drivers, all the workforce that actually keeps small businesses running in the US were in a position where they were, you know, faced with zero income suddenly, right? And this is not a group with a big safety net. So until the Social Security safety net really started kicking in, which took 4 to 6 to sometimes 8 weeks to do, hunger became a major issue here. Now, we as Indians always find that, you know, supporting food charities comes very naturally to us, but I think that it really stepped up when it became a very local issue, right? Around us, there was a need for food and food support in every community in Connecticut, and I know across the United States. So we personally, my wife and I, Mehta and I, who have always believed that it's important to support such initiatives, realize that we have to do it locally, not just globally. And, you know, we connected with Diaspora and we supported the supply chain and food banks across the US. And the $1.1 million that Diaspora delivered was really through a very efficient and large system of food banks. And that was the immediate need, and that was very observable. The second thing that became very clear is that this disruption is so massive in the short run that everyone is dealing with the immediate issue, but also looking for new ideas and for looking for new ways to be able to address issues. So I'm personally, apart from connected with Diaspora and connected to a couple of NGOs that work on preventable blindness globally, I'm also connected to my local homeless shelter. And talk about social distancing in a homeless shelter, right? These become real issues. Rethinking how we support the homeless in Connecticut became a major issue, where we found as professionals that we could contribute a lot in rethinking business models, right? And how things would work. So I think there's a short-run response, and the Indian community has done tremendously there, but I also believe that as this one realizes that this is going to have very long-term impacts, there's an opportunity for us to really help reshape many of the social structures that exist not only in the US, but globally. So back to you.
Terrific. Thanks, Narendra. Let's get into now kind of the next steps, if you will, since we've kind of looked at the past and we're trying to see what we can do now. And Vidya, I know in India, the story that's been highlighted has been the migrant workers. So they were all in the big cities, it looks like. They all kind of went home. What is the next step? Do they get livelihoods at home? Do some of them, I think, have started coming back? What do you see, since you run a nonprofit yourself and talk and work with a lot of NGOs, what is the current thinking in India with what happens to the migrant workers?
I think the one thing that the Prime Minister has also done is, started thinking at a policy level. So there is one issue that the jobs still exist largely in urban centers. And, while when the migrants left, they did feel that, they would not come back. But the fact is that the loss of livelihood is now really pinching very severely. And a lot of people are coming back gradually. But this has helped really put a big spotlight at a policy level on the issue of migrants, because for a long time this force was invisible. Large numbers of them continue to be in sectors where work and labor force is largely unorganized. There is no mechanism for collectivization and social protection. And I think the hope now is that, given the fact that nearly, just about 10 crore people actually just work in the construction industry alone, means that, you really need to think about, at a policy level, greater protection, in terms of both their livelihood as well as in terms of, security. The other thing that has happened is at a reform level, the country has started looking at, there's been, a lot of labor reforms that have been introduced first by a few states, including the state of Uttar Pradesh, where the chief minister actually believes that there should be more livelihood opportunities for the people of the state of Uttar Pradesh, because it is a huge labor exporting state. And we have to see where this goes. There's been a lot of debate about it, about whether this is really the right way to go. But following UP, Madhya Pradesh and a few other states also have emulated a labor reform to enable people to restart industry very quickly. And then there's a whole slew of reforms which has been proposed on the agriculture side, because the largest labor force actually, if you see, is in a single industry continues to be agriculture. There are nearly 200 million people in some way or the other who are dependent on agriculture. So there's a whole spate of reforms which is being planned on the agriculture side as well, to try and open up demand supply chains so that we can start becoming a lot more effective, and the productivity as well as effectiveness of what we do in agriculture grows up. goes up. So I think this is it's also a time where the crisis has enabled us to actually go back to the drawing board on a lot of things. It has highlighted things that we would have otherwise either not known of or ignored. And it's therefore a great opportunity, to work around growth, but with these kinds of reforms, because then we'll have more sustainable and equitable growth.
Great. Thanks, Vidya. There was a good point you brought up, which is this is highlighted and may have been previously ignored, is the inequality that's coming about in all our countries that we live in, whether it's the US or the UK or India, and also the large share of minorities that get impacted by these kind of crises, right? So I think, Hitan, what's the thinking within the diaspora in the UK in terms of the inequalities of the situation today, and to kind of work on that level as well?
I certainly think in the diaspora community here in the UK, we're starting to see, as I said earlier, a lot of data starting to show about BAME communities and where they stand in terms of inequalities. We're seeing data coming through that's sort of starting to highlight those issues at a more UK-wide level rather than in certain pockets around the country. But equally, we're seeing communities like Leicester have gone into a second lockdown, largely because of perhaps some of the indicators around the BAME community. Again, more research needs to be done to be seen as to how some of these areas could start to be addressed overall. And I think there will be health reforms. I think you're going to see more policy reforms coming through, or policies really specifically targeting certain communities that we may not have seen before, and a lot more effort going down that space. I also think that we're seeing the diaspora community starting to engage in a conversation that Vidya was talking about how to support India as a place going forward. And at the British Asian Trust, we've been speaking with the powers in the Indian government and others, really to see what it is that's required to help recovery for a post-COVID-19 situation. And one of the big areas that we're looking at now is seeing how skilling is a key area, and really looking at which sectors require that skilling support. For example, the health sector is a very, very big area now, and suddenly there will be a requirement in and amongst the skills that are required. But also, how does training on those skills happen in a COVID-19 world? So how much of this will now employ technology to be able to do these things? How will we be able to do distance learning in a much more effective and a reasonable economic way, so that it is affordable for those to be able to get involved in those things? And we've been working very closely with the National Skills Development Corporation of India to see how we might be able to look at a development impact bond in this space, because the British Asian Trust has been very good at looking at social finance and seeing how we can create financial models where we're paying for results rather than just sort of investing money all the time constantly into areas. So I think there's sort of two big discussions going on now. One is that for the communities here in the UK, how do we see policy reforms, especially around health, perhaps about health education, that need to become better funded, and also more highlighting of some of the issues around diabetes, heart disease, which are really prevalent in the community, but have never really been addressed in a very systematic and proper way. Lots of people have made lots of efforts, but we're not seeing those results. So that's one side. And on the other, on the India side, we're really trying to see how we can look at skills reform and seeing how we can actually help the system in a post-COVID way, so that actually real skills are delivered in sectors where it's really required in a way that's actually manageable.
Great. Thanks. Narendra, I know one of the things in the US that's complicated the issue now is not only is there the COVID impact, but also now the Black Lives Matter movement has also started highlighting racial injustice and so forth. So as you look at this situation of inequality, racial justice, how do you look at reform and things in a way to move ahead in states like Connecticut and others?
Right. The inequalities in the U.S. have right now they have the pandemic has simply shown every tear in the social fabric and has brought it to life, especially in the U.S. As you point out, and Black Lives Matters is probably one of the most poignant expressions, right? And South Asians find themselves in a unique position over here because we can empathize with it. But at the same time, as we all know, South Asians in the U.S. are exceptionally well off economically, right, compared to other ethnic communities, right? We're probably in the 99th percentile compared to them. But I believe, in personally too, in Connecticut, one of the real opportunities for us as a community is to engage in the reconstruction of many of the economies that are about to happen, right? As we know, we're moving from an immediate impact to what is the world going to look like and what is the social structure and economy going to look like as the pandemic plays itself out and whatever comes after it, which could take a year or 2 years. But we know that digital skills are going to be tremendously valuable going forward, an area where we as a community are so adept, right? We know that small businesses are going to be severely impacted in the US. This is another area where South Asians and Indians have been tremendous entrepreneurs in this country. And the third area, as Hitan pointed out, is healthcare. South Asians are extremely involved in healthcare from a commercial perspective in the US. We stand at the point, and I'm really hoping that we make the most of being able to take our personal depth of skills and our personal experiences and bring them to the redefinition of many of these areas. What I've personally seen, and I think also with your help over here, through Diaspora, is that over the last 3 months, organizations, social organization, government groups, etc., are very open to new people and new ideas, bringing ways to redefine what's going to happen in the future. And so we as a community that have done very well for ourselves really have an opportunity today and an obligation, I believe, to really not only reconnect personally, but also at an organizational level to give back.
Great. Thanks, Narendra. And I want to move on to also some long-term issues. I think I brought up earlier, should migrants stay back in their villages and little towns, or should they go back? What is the sustainable model for them? Also, the NGO sector, we haven't talked about this yet, is the NGO sector has been dramatically impacted. Even though, Vidya, you mentioned there's been an online campaign and a television campaign, and you've seen a lot of retail donations coming in. As a sector as a whole, I'm told for places like India, they've seen dramatic reductions in contributions to NGOs. And this specifically, as you've been so articulate as a champion for the smaller and medium NGOs, they're the ones who've been impacted the most. So can you shine a light on what's going on within the NGO space in terms of the longer term impact?
So I think just as we are seeing, in a sense, massive destruction of, economic activity because of the crisis caused by COVID, we've seen a similar impact on civil society as well, and that's largely because of, in a sense, both a funding crisis and a crisis in what I call the ecosystem of philanthropy. Because the one thing that the crisis did is, while a lot of us opened our purse strings and were very generous, a lot of the money has gone directly either into solving the health issues and, creating more facilities, especially for the poor who cannot afford medical help, or really buying equipment, buying PPE, getting testing stuff, sorted out. And the other place where it's really gone is actually in feeding people, and really working around the issues of starvation, of hunger, of lack of food security, and so on and so forth. And a lot of NGOs have had to repurpose their mission in order to deliver this, because not all of them were in the business of, doing this kind of what we call service delivery at the front lines. So, for example, an organization in Lucknow that we work very actively, with on access to legal justice for victims of violence, because the courts have been shut, they have had to repurpose this to, work with their communities to know what's going on by actually getting into the food delivery business or into getting rations out there. So a lot of people have had to repurpose, but at some time things have to get back to normal, and programmatic interventions and the emphasis on that has to return. Now, there's been, because a lot of the funding has gone there, and as some of you will know, we have this CSR Act in India, which really contributes nearly 15 to 18,000 crores a year, is going to get, the funding from this source, which has been a big, important source of funding for a lot of small and medium NGOs, is going to get impacted because some amount has gone into COVID, as it should. But also there is going to be huge profit contractions this year, which is going to impact CSR allocations. So the sum and substance is the ones that are really going to get hard hit, and as we fear really deeply, is the small and medium-sized NGOs who work very well with communities. They understand community needs. They're able to push through the right programmatic interventions. But a funding crisis is going to exacerbate that. And therefore, I feel that philanthropic organizations, and we've been talking to the British Asian Trust as well, and many of us are now trying to come together to see what can we do to ensure that the sector survives, the civil society part of philanthropy survives, because we need to ensure that there are enough funding to see the end of this crisis through the next few months. And the effort of a lot of us now is how do we rebuild this from now on?
Great. And Hitan, in that regard, with the British Asian Trust, where I don't know where you get your funding from and stuff. Are you going to see contractions, increase in these levels, and how do you plan to support the South Asian countries?
I think what we're seeing is that there definitely is going to be a contraction of people being able to give funding. Our funding is largely from high net worth individuals who have been looking for ways and safe and trusted mechanism to be able to fund in South Asia. But equally, we're seeing those who do have wealth and have the ability to think philanthropically at this stage are going deeper in what they are able to give. So I think you're sort of seeing maybe the smaller sums of money maybe contracting down for those kinds of people who are struggling with their businesses, but an increase in those who have maybe larger sums of wealth being able to go deeper in what they're being able to give. So we're sort of seeing sort of two ends, and perhaps, we're just going to have to wait and see as to what that means in terms of financially where we all come out at the end of all of this. But there's definitely going to be an effect longer term. And as Vidya mentioned, we're seeing a lot of the NGO sector pivoting, adapting very fast, as you would expect in countries like India, where there is that entrepreneurial spirit to be able to say, look, what is the need on the ground? How do we adapt to the people that we're looking after? So, organizations that we work with for anti-trafficking work in India, for example, are suddenly now becoming food distribution places because actually they have to serve communities that they are in touch with, because those communities have been starving. So we've seen a lot of pivoting, a lot of changing of programs very quickly, and adaptability. But as Vidya also said, the need on the ground is only going to increase. We're seeing organizations like Childline India that we work with, they've literally had a doubling of the numbers of calls they've got on a monthly basis, because more children are at home, they are in more difficult environments. So that means that the need is also going to go up at the same time. So we're looking at a real issue that is coming up. I think, again, no one's sure what the numbers are going to do in India. There are definitely big hotspots at the moment, and those numbers have been rising. And I think, we just need to be able to make sure that the work we are doing is being done in as much of a sustainable way that we possibly can, to really think about the sector, but also think about the real programs that can be scaled in this crisis, so that actually there's a lot less repetition of efforts perhaps, and actual real collaboration coming together between organizations, I think will be a real big way that things need to happen, with the involvement largely as well with the private sector coming on board to help support this as well. It cannot be done alone by civil society, cannot be done alone by government. I think it has to come together in these partnerships. Otherwise, there is no way to be able to tackle scales of problems that we're going to see in India.
Right. And Narendra, I know the ironic thing in this tough time is that the stock markets seem to be completely disconnected with what's happening on the ground, right? So you as a business guy and looking at philanthropy and stuff, how do we take advantage of this disconnect with the stock market and reality to kind of get some more monies and efforts going?
I think both Vidya Bain as well as Hitan really touched on it, and I'm actually we're seeing and experiencing the same thing. My personal experience, as I said, is what a global NGO that focuses on preventable blindness. It's called SEVA, and it's very active in India with organizations like Arvind and other eye clinics, as well as with local homeless shelters and through my partnership with Diaspora, right? But in all cases, there's this immediate need. But what we've seen and what we've learned is we need a clear vision for the future for both the NGOs we're engaged with. And if we can articulate that clear vision, there's an opportunity, because of where the market is and deep philanthropists, to be able to engage in a discussion with philanthropic organizations who are also looking to reach deeper in their pockets. A great example in the US is that the Ford Foundation, for the first time, they launched $1 billion social bond because they want to give more this year. They give 5% of their endowment every year, but this year they said they wanted to double that. And the way they doubled it is by launching a bond, because they know that organizations right now need to deal with the immediacy of where they are, as well as get ready for the future. So I think many of us who are part of the diaspora and are in the fortunate positions we are, can not only help by giving, but also by helping the NGOs we're involved with, planning for the future, and help guide them to have a vision that can attract both social bonds as well as deep philanthropists. So I'm an eternal optimist. That's what I've always been. And I do believe that this is an opportunity for us as a community to really step up and engage in a very special way. So back to you, M R.
Thank you so much. We are nearing the end of the session, so let me wrap this up. I think we took a look at what's happening today, what the medium-term problems are, and what the long-term opportunities might be. And I think with people like you, Vidya, Hitan, and Narendra, I think there's a lot of hope that the diaspora and India as a whole can figure out a path forward, and we can all help each other, and we can really get to the next level of humanity being helped by everyone, and more equality here, and more caring and compassion. So I really want to thank the three of you, Vidya, Hitan, and Narendra, for this great panel, and look forward to staying in touch with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
It really made me think. This session really made me think about how in this pandemic we've all been part in the same ocean, but we have not been riding it in the same boats. Some of us have been in super yachts, and others have been clinging on to rafts during a terrible sea. So thank you very much.